What's up, guys? This is kind of awkward and different. It's weird having you guys here. I'm sure it's kind of weird being on the other end. But man, I miss you guys. I miss hanging out with you guys, shaking your hands and talking with you and chilling with you and playing games. So I hope you guys are doing all right. I hope you guys are doing well. But for the foreseeable future, at least definitely for the next 2 weeks, it looks like this is how we're going to have to meet, unfortunately. And even past 2 weeks, it's kind of unforeseen, so we don't really know what's going to happen. But this is how we're going to have to meet. So in light of that, I would encourage you, go follow our Instagram page. It's at PABC Youth. And I'm going to try to be posting daily updates on our Instagram page as to what's happening and what we're doing. And definitely, if you have a prayer request, or if you're stressing out about something that you need prayer for, dude, comment or DM us, and we would love to pray for you. Your small group leaders want to pray for you and pray with you, as do I. So please feel free to comment and DM us if you have a prayer request. And also, likewise, if you're doing your daily Bible study or whatever, and something sticks out to you or God speaks to you, comment on that. Comment on the pictures there, and let us know. I think that's going to be a great way for us to continue to connect, even though we're quarantined and away from each other. I think that's going to be a great way for us to connect. So please follow our Instagram page at PABC Youth, and I'll be giving updates there and hopefully trying to connect with you guys on Instagram there. But let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to be in we're going to be in John chapter 21. Verses 15 through 19, and further on through there. So if you turn your Bibles to John chapter 21, that'd be awesome. But I just want to share a few things. Man, I'm kind of stressed out about the situation, honestly. It's just clouding my mind. I'm thinking about it all the time, everything that's going on with the coronavirus. And, I mess around a lot. I joke around a lot. And... But man, I'm going to tell you the truth. I'm really kind of stressed out. I have some family that have breathing problems, and I'm just stressed out about the situation. And I'm sure you guys joke around too. We joke around, but I'm sure you guys are kind of stressed out as well. We tend to hide that with jokes. But I want to share a verse that really stuck out to me in the midst of everything that's going on, and in the midst of being stressed. It really spoke to me, and this is a verse that I'm going to cling to. It's Psalms chapter 46, verse 1. Psalms chapter 46, verse 1. It says, "God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear, though the earth gives way, though the mountains may be moved into the heart of the sea." Man, I really feel like society is falling into the sea, right? I feel like everything is going crazy. Things are breaking down. But verse 1 says, man, God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. And I'm clinging to that verse right now. I hope you will too. Psalms 46, verse 1, because it's crazy. It is absolutely crazy out there. And that's just a verse that spoke to me. So I wanted to share that. But we're going to go ahead and get started. John chapter 21, verse 15. I'm going to give you a little background of this story, and then we'll dive right into it. So we're going to be talking about Jesus restoring Peter. So this is after Jesus has died. He's been resurrected, and the resurrected Jesus is going to restore Peter. They're going to hang out, and we're going to see some cool things. But what I want you to remember is, if you remember back when Jesus was on trial and he was arrested, if you remember, Peter is kind of a loud mouth. He's a big mouth. Before Jesus was arrested, Peter was like, "Jesus, I will never deny you. I will never leave you. They're going to have to kill me before I disown you." And what's interesting is when Jesus was being arrested, the Bible tells that Peter denied Jesus 3 times, which is really ironic and interesting because Jesus called that. And when Peter denied Jesus the third time, Luke tells us that Jesus looked right at Peter, right into his eyes, right at Peter. And so we're going to kind of be talking about that. We're going to talk about how Jesus restores Peter in John chapter 21. So if you turn in your Bibles to John chapter 21, we're going to be on verse 15. We're going to start there. So I'm going to read it all the way through, and then we're going to kind of go verse by verse and break this down a little bit. Verse 15 says, when they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter. Okay, so Jesus is hanging out with the disciples. This is the resurrected Jesus. He died, and he was in the tomb for 3 days, and then he rose again. And so this is the resurrected Jesus. And so Jesus is hanging out with the disciples. It says, when they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? Yes, Lord, he said. You know that I love you. Jesus said, feed my lambs. Again, Jesus said, Simon, son of John, do you love me? He answered, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. Jesus said, take care of my sheep. The third time he said to him, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him the third time, do you love me? He said, Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you. And then Jesus said, feed my sheep. Very truly, I tell you, when you were younger, you dressed yourself and went where you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands and someone else will dress you and lead you where you do not want to go. Jesus said this to indicate the kind of death by which Peter would glorify God. Then he said to him, follow me. This is one of my favorite stories. Okay, this is one of my favorite stories. And we're going to kind of break this down, and we're going to talk about why it's one of my favorite stories. And it's very relevant to today. And we're going to talk about that in just a second. But look at verse 15 with me. Verse 15 says, when they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? Okay, so what's interesting is Jesus is asking this question. Okay? We know that Jesus is the Son of God. Therefore, Jesus knows everything. He knows everything. So he knows the answer to this question. So why is he asking Peter? Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? And Peter says, yes, Lord. You know that I love you. So even Peter recognized, like, dude, Jesus, you know that I love you. You know that. Verse 16 says, again, a second time, Jesus said, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Peter answered, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. And then third time he asked again, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And the third one is what really broke Peter. The third time Jesus asked that is what really broke Peter. Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him the third time, do you love me? He said, Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you. And what I want us to think about is, why was Jesus asking this question? Why was Jesus asking this question? It's pretty interesting because Jesus knows everything. Jesus knows everything. So why, he knows the answer to this question, so why is he asking this question? And I want to tell you, he's asking this question to show Peter that he's still pursuing him, that Jesus is pursuing Peter. That's what Jesus wants to show Peter. Again, if you remember, Peter denied Jesus 3 times. Peter denied Jesus 3 times when Jesus was being arrested. And Peter was ashamed about that. He was upset about that. He knew that he messed up. Luke even tells us that the third time Peter said, I don't know who Jesus is. That third time, Jesus turns and looks at Peter right in the eyes. And Peter was broken over that. And it's really incredible because Peter is one of those guys that he just kind of flies off by the hip. I identify a lot with Peter. He's kind of a big mouth, and he just doesn't know when to shut up. And Peter's one of the guys that thinks like, oh, I'm the toughest. I can do this. But when he was thrown into the fire, when he was put into a difficult situation, he failed. He failed the test. He failed that situation, that difficult situation. And so Jesus now is hanging out with him, and Jesus asked 3 times, Peter, do you love me? Jesus is wanting Peter to know that Jesus is still pursuing him. Jesus is still pursuing Peter. Jesus is still pursuing Peter. And that's incredible because that's a great encouragement to me. Because, man, your mistakes don't eliminate you from Jesus. I want you to think about that. Your mistakes don't eliminate you from Jesus. And I think a lot of our students, not necessarily vocally, but just by their actions, some students think that, when we make a mistake, when we mess up, Jesus is out to punish us. And Jesus is out to get us. And Jesus is out to make us feel bad. But this story tells us differently. This story is telling us that even though we make mistakes, we're not eliminated from Jesus' love. We're not eliminated from God's love, which is really incredible. I imagine when Jesus is asking these questions, Peter, do you love me? I imagine that Jesus is looking Peter straight in the eyes. You know what I'm saying? Just like when Peter denied him, Jesus looked right across the crowd and saw him. I imagine in this moment, Jesus is looking right in Peter's eyes and asking him this question. Jesus is still pursuing Peter, even though he made a mistake, even though he messed up. And that's a great encouragement to me because my mistakes don't eliminate me from Jesus being able to use me. And I think a lot of students feel that way. Jesus is not out to punish you. Jesus is out to restore you. What's interesting is Jesus didn't come and die on the cross and raise again from the grave to punish you. Jesus died on the cross to restore you. And that's what he's doing to Peter right now. He's restoring Peter. Obviously, it was difficult. It hurt Peter, but Jesus restored him. What's awesome is that Peter goes on to become one of the most outspoken disciples of Jesus. One of the most outspoken disciples of Jesus. In verse 18, Jesus says, very truly, I tell you, Peter, when you were younger, you dressed yourself and went where you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands and someone else will dress you and lead you where you don't want to go. Verse 19 says, Jesus said this to indicate the kind of death by which Peter would glorify God. Then he said to him, follow me. Peter goes on to become one of the greatest disciples to ever live. God used someone who made a mistake, who made a big mistake, denying Jesus, not just once, but 3 times. God used someone who denied Jesus in a really difficult situation and took him, restored him here, and Peter goes on to become one of the greatest disciples to ever live. That's such an encouragement to me because, being a youth pastor, and I'm growing up in the church for my whole life, I always feel like, I don't make mistakes. I've been here so long, like I don't make mistakes anymore. And then when I do make a mistake, it's really hard. And I'm always like, well, Jesus is clearly, he's so mad at me and God is so mad at me and he's coming after me. But that's not the case. Obviously, when we make mistakes, it breaks Jesus' heart. But Jesus is out to restore us, not to punish us. And obviously, God is just, and he will punish wickedness. But that is not his desire. He wants to pursue you. He wants a relationship with us, even when we make mistakes. Let's look at a couple more verses. Verse 19, Jesus said this to indicate the kind of death by which Peter would glorify God. Then he said to him, follow me. Verse 20, look at verse 20 with me real quick. It says, Peter turned and saw that the disciple whom Jesus loved was following them. This was the one who had leaned back against Jesus at the supper and had said, Lord, who is going to betray you? Verse 21 says, when Peter saw him, he asked, Lord, what about him? Jesus answered, if I want him to remain alive until I return, what is that to you? You must follow me. Okay. What this indicates is that as followers of Christ, we cannot get caught up in necessarily what others are doing. Like if someone is doing something super awesome for Jesus, we can't be like, well, I'm clearly not as good because look at this guy over here. He's doing all these crazy things for Jesus and things like that. Jesus is saying here, you worry about your relationship with Christ. We obviously still need to speak the gospel, and we need to proclaim our faith. But Jesus is saying, hey, man, you worry about your relationship with me. I have a plan for you. You must follow it. Follow my plan for you. Don't worry about my plan for him. You follow the plan I have for you. And this is just a real encouragement to me because God still has a plan for us, even when we make mistakes. And one other thing that I want us to see is that, on that third time that Jesus asks Peter, do you love me? That's when Peter breaks down and he kind of lets it. I imagine he probably he cried. He was like, Jesus, you know I love you. Listen, Jesus is going to pursue us. And following Christ isn't always easy. But in the midst of our brokenness, that's when God typically restores us the most. That's when God typically fears nearest the most, in the midst of our mistakes. And I would pray that you would take this word with you, that you would understand that your mistake or your mistakes are not going to eliminate you from God's plan. Obviously, mistakes break Jesus' heart. It hurts him. But Jesus still wants to use you. Your mistakes don't eliminate you from his plan. So I hope that that this word speaks to you, and I hope you guys have a great discussion with your small group leaders.